Contrary to what you think, the alternative minimum tax can actually be a really good thing, but it can negatively affect your tax bill. So which one is it, good or bad? Yes. I'm going to ask 7 questions that could clarify whether AMT is good or bad for your situation. AMT is the ultimate oxymoron, kind of like the kid that went to my high school whose last name was Wimpy, yet he was 6'5" and played in the NFL. The alternative minimum tax is an oxymoron because it's not alternative, you have to calculate it, and it's not minimum because it's an additional tax that goes on top of your already existing tax liability. But it can be a great thing because it has the potential to unlock these benefits. First, owning company stock. Oftentimes, AMT is the door that you have to walk through to own company stock. But the gains you may receive from stock ownership might outweigh the costs, especially if you leverage the second benefit AMT unlocks, which is qualifying disposition. In other words, receiving the long-term capital gains tax rate when you go and sell your stock. Oftentimes, you can't get there without paying AMT. A third benefit of AMT is that it can be just a temporary tax, as you have the potential to recoup the AMT that you paid through a tax credit in later years. Let's not get too excited about the benefits, as it is an additional tax after all. So here are 7 questions you can ask yourself to understand if AMT may be good or bad. Let's get into the first question by looking at 2 separate tax rates. Can you guess which one is AMT? Now, which rate would you rather pay? AMT or ordinary income? Great, one more. How about now? Which one would you rather pay? But in this case, the larger number is the AMT tax rate. What I just showed you is the paradox of AMT. You don't have to fully understand its complexities to know that AMT has potential to be both good and bad. Think about it, AMT's tax rate may be smaller than your regular tax rate, in which case triggering AMT would be beneficial because it could lead to savings on your overall tax bill. So there's definitely an opportunity to save on taxes here. On the other hand, if your ordinary income tax rate falls below AMT, then AMT is probably a bad thing. Question number 1 is, what is your current ordinary income tax rate? Sadly, this question isn't that simple. We are in a progressive tax system, so if you earn an extra dollar that puts you into a new tax bracket, only that dollar is taxed at a higher rate, and all of your prior earnings are still taxed at their lower rates. So not only would I want to know what your current tax rate is, but I'd also want to know how deep into the tax bracket are you. If you're deeper into a high tax bracket, you're more likely to get a benefit from AMT. On the flip side, if you just jumped from the 24% tax bracket to the 32% tax bracket, AMT is less likely to be worth it. But there's still one piece of the question that I didn't include that I will now. What are your current and future tax rates? Let me say something that will knock you off center. I want you to pay more in taxes this year. That is, if it means a lower overall tax bill over time. The goal isn't just to lower your tax rate this year, but over the long term. Triggering more AMT might actually make sense, even if it means paying a larger AMT tax bill this year. We can't just look at AMT in a vacuum. We need to zoom out and see how will it affect things over your whole incentive stock option exercise schedule, which could be several years at a minimum. This will affect how you strategize around AMT. It's generally safe to say that if your current and future tax rates will be above 28%, then AMT has the potential to be good. If your tax rates are below 28%, then AMT is probably a bad thing. But don't come to any conclusions yet because there are more questions you should ask yourself. One of the benefits of AMT largely depends on your answer to question number 2. Let me explain through this analogy. Have you ever played the game Tetris? In the game, a random shape will drop down from the top of the screen and it's your job to try to get it to fit horizontally. What if in Tetris you couldn't shift the shapes from side to side? You would lose pretty quickly. Utilizing AMT to lower your tax rate largely depends on your ability to shift income. The idea here is to earn income while paying taxes at a lower rate than what you normally pay. In other words, getting the good while it's getting. Get while the getting's good. For example, those that are in higher tax brackets can accelerate their income into the year that they're paying AMT. One can do this through NSO exercises, ESPP sales, Roth conversions, and so on. For example, if you were going to exercise your NSOs at your 37% tax rate, just know that you may be able to do it at AMT's 28% tax rate, saving 9% on taxes. But don't take action yet, as this has to be part of an overall plan, as these income shifting tools could help you expedite the return of your AMT credit too. In theory, if AMT is a good thing, you should be accelerating your income to the point where you're not actually paying much AMT. That's a discussion for another day, but I want you to think about your income. Is it just salary, or is there some other complexity to your situation such as NSOs, real estate income, and so on? That is why question number 2 is, can you shift your income? If you have the ability to shift your income, then AMT could be a good thing. If not, AMT is probably less favorable. If you're finding value in this, please hit the like button. Here's an unsolicited joke about AMT. When asked if the glass was half full or half empty, the tax planner responded with, "It's a empty glass." A empty glass? Okay, that was bad. If you don't nail question number 3, you're increasing the risk of a financial crisis. Imagine exercising your incentive stock options at the beginning of the year, triggering AMT. In the summer, something terrible happens financially, like some unexpected expense that comes up that depletes your savings. You can no longer afford AMT. Not all hope is lost, but you need to act quickly. The trick to avoiding AMT is to sell your stock before the end of the tax year. Typically, if you buy and sell in the same tax year, then you don't have to pay AMT. This is called disqualifying disposition, but there's one major gotcha. If you can't sell your stock, then you're stuck with your AMT bill. For example, if the company is private, in a blackout period, or a lockup period, you might not be able to sell the stock before the end of the tax year. That is why question number 3 is your stock liquid? I could have just asked if your company was public or private, but I know private companies that have recurring liquidity events for their employees. The liquidity of your stock options can really complicate your financial planning and your tax planning. Yet this could be worth tens of thousands of dollars in tax savings. So if you'd like to work with a professional, my firm specializes in this. More information in the description below. For those who have liquidity with their stock, AMT has the potential to be a good thing. If the stock is not liquid, then AMT comes with greater risks. Question number 4 will help you avoid this big AMT mistake that I'll explain through this hypothetical situation. Let's say you were to exercise your shares on December 31st, and one day later, you sell your shares on January 1st. That's a bad move. You know how I said that if you sell in the same year that you purchased the shares, then you avoid AMT? Well, in this hypothetical situation, you sold and purchased the shares in separate tax years, even though there was just a single day difference. So you have to pay AMT. What's worse, because you sold within a year of exercising the shares, you then trigger disqualifying disposition, which means you pay the higher short-term capital gains rates on the gains. You have to pay AMT, and you didn't get the benefit of the better tax rate. You got the worst of both worlds. Generally speaking, if you're going to pay AMT by not selling in the same year that you purchased the stock, then you should at least consider holding for the long-term capital gain rates that come through qualifying disposition. That said, sometimes there's a looming expiration date on the stock options or some other unique situation that warrants you selling earlier. So that's why I like to ask this question. Question 4, how long will you hold the stock? If you plan on holding for the long run, then yes, AMT may be beneficial because it is the door that you have to walk through in order to get the long-term capital gains rates through qualifying disposition. One more consideration if you are holding for the long run is if this over-concentration in company stock is worth the risk. Question number 5 is, are you human? If so, then this is not intended to be a substitute for individual, specific legal, tax, or investment advice. Your personal values, goals, and other circumstances may render some or all of this information inaccurate. As such, I've been avoiding using definitives such as this will or this is always the case because of these many variables. These 7 questions are not an all-inclusive list that will perfectly predict your AMT outcome. Sorry, I had to squeeze that in there for your own safety. Here's the real question. Sorry, I have to turn the lights off for this because it's gonna get scary. I'll share a real life example of what happens if you don't ask this question early on. But first you need to understand that as humans have a risk spectrum that helps us make decisions. Let's look at cliff jumping, for example. The reward is 2 seconds of free falling. The risk is shattered bones or death. Now, is that a risk worth taking? No, not at all. When it comes to your stock options and AMT, we're dealing with an investment, which has risks. Are you able to stomach these risks? I met someone whose story is the reason why we need to ask question number 5. He exercised when his stock price was super high, creating a large AMT bill. But by the time he needed to pay his AMT bill, his stock had flopped terribly. He didn't have the funds from his stock proceeds to pay that massive AMT bill. It was devastating. He had to sell his home, he had to move, and was nearly suicidal. This isn't a one-off experience either. either. This has happened to many individuals. So that is why I like to ask question number 5, which is what is your risk tolerance and risk capacity? Risk tolerance is your ability to take on that risk emotionally, and risk capacity is your financial ability to take on that risk. Can you afford for the stock to lose its value? If your risk tolerance and capacity are high, then AMT has the potential to be good. If your risk tolerance and capacity are low, then AMT is probably a bad thing. Question number 6 really forces people to examine their motives behind their money. It comes down to determining what you want to do with your money. Earlier in the video, I talked about how you can get the advantageous long-term capital gain rates on the bargain element through qualifying disposition. But how do you actually get there? In order to achieve qualifying disposition, you must wait at least 1 year from the date of exercise and 2 years from the date of grant before you sell your stock. The implication is that you're not buying and selling in the same tax year, so there's a good chance that you actually trigger AMT. So question number 6 is what's more important to you? Quick access to cash or the best tax rate? If you're there for the best tax rate, then potentially AMT is a good thing because it gets you one step closer to qualifying disposition. On the other hand, if you're saving for something specific like a down payment or a master's degree, then maybe you need quick access to cash. Holding the stock for the long term and triggering AMT might not align with your liquidity and cash needs. On to question number 7. If you suspect that you might trigger AMT, then you'll definitely want to be aware of this. Incentive stock options are a deferral item for AMT. When you exercise them, there's a chance that you pay AMT, but you have the opportunity to get that money back through a future tax credit. In this case, AMT is more about the timing of the tax payment than it is about paying an extra tax. Therefore, you can think of AMT as a temporary thing that can permanently reduce your tax bill in 2 separate years. First, in the year in which you accelerate your income, and second, the year in which you recoup that AMT credit. Let's dive into this a little bit. In the year that you pay AMT, you can accelerate income at AMT's 28% tax rate rather than paying the higher 37% tax rate, for example. What's more, in the year that you take your AMT credit, you are reducing your tax liability, which could potentially save that year's income from being taxed at the 37% tax rate. Thus, AMT can be extremely effective in reducing your tax bill in the short term and the long term. That is why question number 7 is, are you patient and willing to wait? If you're impatient, then AMT is probably a bad thing. If you are patient, then AMT can potentially be good. Did you know that getting the AMT credit back could take many years? I found it's difficult to get any more than $4,000 to $8,000 per year in that credit back, even if you have financial resources and flexibility. Note that this is under current tax law, which may be changing in a couple years. The longer it takes you to get that credit back, the less valuable it becomes. My grandfather was able to buy a hamburger for 15 cents. It's no secret that 15 cents isn't what it used to be. Likewise, as your salary and inflation continue to grow, that once valuable AMT credit won't cover the same percentage of your income that it used to. Say that you have a $50,000 AMT credit. That may equate to half of your income today, but may be a quarter of your income in several years from now. So if this is going to take you multiple decades to get back, which it very well could, then it might not be worth it. This is showing you how long-term you need to be thinking, not only with AMT, but the AMT credit. You also need to be aware that sometimes AMT is permanent and has no credit. So how do you get the AMT credit, and how do you get that money back faster? If you want to know how the AMT credit works, watch this video right here.